Welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. To preface, I'm not a big believer in anything supernatural. I enjoy reading stories, especially from Irish folklore, but I've always been a skeptic, believing that most unexplained happenings are ascertainable with a little research. However, I have no explanation for this which happened a few weeks ago, and am curious if anyone else has had any similar experiences. I'm a little lazy at the moment, so I'll just be copying and pasting what I texted a friend about this experience. I was moving some stuff out of my car up to my room that I'd procrastinated since moving out of my college apartment to my parents' place LOL. And I had this academic history book about Oliver Cromwell's conquest of Jamaica that is very, very dry and was expensive, like $40. Basically, there's no reason anyone would own this book unless you're a history major or professor. So when I was moving some boxes upstairs, that book was balancing pretty precariously, so I knew it was going to fall, and it fell across from a little bonus room we have near the stairs. I kept going upstairs and just put my box in my room, and then ran back downstairs and back up to pick up the book and put it on the bookshelf in my room. My mom told me that she heard the book fall, and she also heard my footsteps going back downstairs to pick up the book and upstairs to put it away. Where the book fell was across from our little bonus room, but it used to be my papa's bedroom when he lived with us. He lived with us from when I was 6 till I was 13, and he passed away in that room. I avoided that room for a really long time, but I've always figured it just subconsciously made me feel sad. He was born in Donegal, Ireland in 1930, and from him I was always raised with tales of Irish folklore and culture. He also sparked my interest in history from a young age from hearing him talk about Ireland. Anyway, the next day I decided to go on a walk during the halftime of the Seahawks game, so I could smoke a joint and honestly just get some fresh air. Before I even started smoking or anything, so I was not in any way intoxicated when this occurred, I decided to cross the street so I could go to this woodsy area near my parents' house. When I crossed the street, I went to the left, and outside this house I saw a book which I thought was odd, but I figured it was one of those free library things. I got closer to see if it was anything interesting, and I saw Oliver Cromwell's face, and my stomach dropped. It was that book that I distinctly remember falling downstairs and putting back on my bookshelf. It was propped up against this house's front yard and had a snail crawling on top of it. I booked it back to my parents' house and explained the situation. I'm normally quite the skeptic of things of that sort and chalk most of it up to coincidences, but I have no explanation for this. Especially since I specifically remember bringing that book inside and upstairs, I have no clue how it would have ended up outside, let alone across and down the street. My mom and I have been joking that my papa's ghost moved the book out of the house as a fuck you to Oliver Cromwell LOL, since he was also terrible to the Irish, but I still don't know what to make of it. Anything similar happened to anyone here? I also have a photo of when I found the book, unsure how to attach it on this subreddit though. Story 2. For context, this has now happened twice, in the exact same spot, on the exact same road. I live in a UK city called Brighton. There's a long main street that runs straight through the center called Western Road. It eventually leads into the next town, Hove. The buildings there are mostly old and tightly connected, with bars, shops, and restaurants filling the ground floors. A few years ago, my boyfriend and I were walking home from dinner when we noticed a tall man with long dreadlocks approaching. Nothing about him stood out much, apart from his vividly colored jacket, but that's normal here. Brighton's full of eccentric fashion. He passed us, walking casually. Then about 30 seconds later, there he was again. Same man, same pace, same direction, walking past us as though time had folded. We both froze. To pull that off, he would have needed to sprint down the nearest side street, loop through several alleys, and reappear ahead of us in under half a minute. But he wasn't out of breath. He didn't even glance at us. We never saw him again after that night, though we always looked. Then last night, it happened again. Same spot. We'd eaten at the same restaurant, and were strolling home when I noticed a stylish couple approaching. The woman had this elegant, Parisian look that caught my attention. They passed us, and 15 seconds later, they passed us again, identical in every detail. I can't explain it. I've never been superstitious or spiritual, never believed in glitches or ghosts. But after last night, I honestly don't know what to think. I came here just to tell someone, because it's starting to feel like that stretch of Western Road isn't playing by the rules. Story 3. I live a little over an hour away from my hometown, so I make a point to call my mom every couple of weeks to catch up on family news. The usual updates about who's doing what, who's had a baby, who's moved, that sort of thing. A few months before summer, I made one of those calls and asked how my sister was doing. My mom sighed and told me something that hit me hard. She said my sister's dog, Honey, had passed away. Honey was a lovely old sheepdog with a ton of personality, one of those dogs that just radiated warmth. I used to dog sit her often, and she always followed me around the house like a shadow. Hearing she'd died really shook me. I remember tearing up after hanging up the phone, telling my boyfriend through sobs how unfair it felt. Later that evening, I even called my sister. We talked about how much we missed Honey, where she was going to be buried, and how her son had been especially heartbroken. It was a really emotional conversation. Fast forward to Thanksgiving, just a couple of weeks ago. My sister and her husband were spending the holiday with his family out of state, so they'd left their dogs with my parents. When I walked into my parents' house, I froze. There, curled up comfortably in her dog bed, was Honey, alive, healthy, tail wagging. For a second, my brain couldn't process it. I dropped to the floor, hugging her, laughing and crying at the same time. I turned to my mom and said, "Why did you tell me Honey died?" She just looked at me, totally bewildered, and said she never had. I spent half an hour outside tossing the ball for Honey, still trying to make sense of it. When my boyfriend and I drove home later that night, I brought it up, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But he remembered it too. He remembered me crying, talking about Honey's death, and even mentioning her burial. Neither of us can explain it. I know what I heard, and yet there she was, very much alive. Story 4. I have the same routine every single day. I wake up around 5 a.m., grab a quick bite, watch a little TV to wake myself up, then get dressed and head to work. I've lived in this apartment with my roommate for about 2 years now, so everything about my mornings is predictable. Same lighting, same sounds, same sequence of actions. But about 7 months ago, something happened that completely shattered that sense of normal. It was early February. I remember because it was still freezing outside. That morning, I got up like usual, but the air in the apartment felt wrong. Heavy. Stale. I can't explain it, just that everything seemed slightly off, like the silence had a pulse. When I walked into the kitchen, I froze. Sitting on the counter was a tray of homemade cookies shaped like stars, frosted red, white, and blue. Next to them were American flag napkins and what looked like off-brand M&Ms in patriotic colors. I thought maybe my roommate was doing some weird late-night baking project, but the theme made no sense. Why 4th of July stuff in the dead of winter? I shook it off, made some coffee, and turned on the TV. That's when things got truly bizarre. There were no streaming apps, no home screen, just static-filled old channels. Every commercial looked dated, grainy, like something from an old VHS tape. The anchors on the news wore 80s hairstyles and shoulder pads. One ad even mentioned a 4th of July sale happening this weekend. Confused, I flipped to the Weather Channel. In the corner of the screen it said, July 3rd, 1986. At first, I thought it was a nostalgia channel, but every station was the same. I tried calling my mom, no signal. My phone would start dialing, but never connect. I remember my hands shaking as I walked down the hall to wake my roommate, but halfway there, I saw movement. A woman, probably in her 70s, crossed the hallway carrying a tray of something. She walked from my roommate's room into mine, completely solid, not ghostly or transparent. Just a reel. I froze, heart pounding, and then bolted into my roommate's room, yelling her name. She woke up, confused, but came to see for herself. When we got back to the living room, everything was normal again. The cookies, napkins, and candies were gone. The TV showed regular channels. My phone worked. To this day, we still talk about it, both of us uneasy about that morning. We can't explain it. Maybe a glitch, maybe some kind of time slip, but I can still picture that woman, still see those cookies, and I'll never forget how wrong the air felt that day. Story 5. Let me begin by saying I was born in 1998. So this is by far the weirdest experience I've had. Anyway, I'm not much of a dreamer, but when I do dream, it's usually very lucid and memorable. So I had a dream that my mother was alone in an old, really poor-looking house with my newborn sister and was waiting for my dad to get home. It was dark out, and my mother was anxious, waiting at the door, hoping my father would show up. The house was a one-room structure with only 4 or 5 candles illuminating it. I was casually talking to my mother, saying it's all okay, and just reassuring her that everything is okay. Suddenly my mother looked at me and was thanking me for being with her while she was alone and for protecting her. Then next thing I know, I wake up. I thought it was an odd dream, but didn't think much of it after I showered and went to work. Fast forward 3 days, it's a Friday night, and my parents and I are outside in my front yard sitting around a fire talking. And my parents began to joke about how my mother used to pop my father's bike tires when they lived in Mexico. My parents are Mexican and came to the U.S. in '95. I ask what's the story behind that, and they begin to explain to me that back when my sister was born in 1991, they lived in an old shack in a poor part of a small town in Mexico for a year. My father had the habit of going out on his bike with friends to drink and not coming home until the next morning, so my mother would pop the tires on his bike so he wouldn't leave. I laughed and didn't think much else until they continued on about it. My mother said she'd be terrified of being home alone in the tiny home because they lived in an alley known as El Callejón de la Llorona, which translates to Alley of the Weeping Woman. For those unfamiliar, the Weeping Woman is an urban legend in Mexico about a ghost woman who roams areas of Mexico and even parts of the U.S. weeping for missing kids. So naturally an alley named after the ghost is going to be terrifying as fuck. My mother continued on saying how terrified she was in that house alone and would wait praying for empty father to come home. My father then made a joke saying something along the lines of, "Why did you want me there? You claimed your guardian angel was protecting you." At this point I thought, okay, what the fuck? So I asked my mom more, and she told me that she one night was visited by a man who seemingly came out of the wall, but she felt comfort and familiarity around him. He sat and spoke to her, reassuring her it's okay, before the man seemingly walked back into the wall. My mother said that after this she felt a strong calmness around and was no longer afraid of being there. This tripped me out considering I was born in '98 and I had never heard a thing about my mother's story until after I had that dream. I'm not sure if it's just a coincidence or if it's something more complex. Anyway, I apologize for any bad grammar or errors. It's almost 4 a.m. here, and I typed this in a rush, just needed to put it out there. Also sorry if I post this on the wrong subreddit, I'm new here. Story 6. Okay, when I started reading this, I wanted to share my similar experience. I had a very similar glitch a couple months ago, and I am so happy to hear someone else can relate. I too was born in 1998. In one of my dreams, I thought I time traveled to 1996/1997-ish, so not long before I was born. My dream started out as me walking out of a concert hall in the late afternoon/early evening. I'm a musician. As I walked to my car, I got this massive headache. I looked down at my music in my hand, and I saw the notes start to fall off the page and disappear. It was weird. I put my instrument in the passenger seat of my car and walked around to the driver's side. By the time I got into my car, the instrument was gone too. I don't know why, but I knew I had to drive to a hospital. My headache was far too painful. However, instead of driving to the nearest hospital, I ended up driving to the one I was born at. I parked at the back of the parking lot. It's sunset at this point. I got out of the car, and I felt an intense pain in my head. I dropped my keys. When I bent down to get them, they were gone. I turned around, and my car had disappeared too. I was freaked out, so I started running toward the hospital. While I was running, my clothes started changing. By the time I reached the steps of the hospital, I was barefoot and in a hospital gown. Time slowed down for a second at this point. Everything was in slow motion. I looked around and got this feeling that I wasn't in 2017 anymore. The fashion resembled the 90s. In the distance I could hear faint music playing, and it shifted between songs like switching through radio stations with fuzz in between each. I can't remember all the bits of songs I heard, but I definitely heard some Oasis, Radiohead, and other alternative songs from the early mid-90s. This led me to believe that I had actually traveled back in time. I walked up the steps, and in the distance I saw my parents, my grandparents, and my uncle sitting on a bench outside of the hospital. Except they were younger versions of themselves. My mom still had her perm and longer hair, and my dad was a bit thinner. My grandparents had more hair and less gray in it, and my uncle looked like he was fresh out of college. They were talking and laughing. I remember yelling, "Mom," but they didn't seem to hear me. I stopped about 15 feet from them. At that point, my mom turned and looked in my direction. We locked eyes, and though I couldn't hear any other part of their conversation, I heard her longingly say, "Yeah, she would have been beautiful too." At that moment, I felt my skin turn cold. Her look shifted, almost as if she was looking past me rather than looking straight at me. I glanced down at my skin, and it was translucent. I saw her turn back to the rest of my family, and they started talking and laughing again. I felt someone bump into me, but rather than bump into me, they kind of walked right through me. My skin was becoming more and more see-through, as if I was disappearing too. And then I woke up. I know that my mom had somewhere around 8 miscarriages before I was born. She claims that clearly her body was not made for baby making, but at least I know I wasn't an accident, lol. This dream happened about 2.5 months ago, and I've never been able to recall the details of a dream as vividly as this one. When I read this post, I couldn't help but share this story. I know how freaky that feeling is, OP. Story 7. So few key things here before I get into it. I work the front desk at an internal medicine clinic. All the phones are Cisco phones that have caller ID and a history log. I've worked here for 3 years, and I know pretty much all of the patients extremely well. So well that our doctor will ask me if someone is our patient or not, because I can remember extremely insignificant details off the top of my head, such as a person's middle initial in their name. I'm the only person who works the front desk, so unless I'm already on a call, I answer every phone call coming into the clinic. Because I answer every call, I know many patients just by the sound of their voice, especially if they call frequently. The doctor I work for doesn't take new patients, so we don't have an extremely high number of patients. This is also why I know so many patients so well, because it's mostly the same people over and over with rarely any new faces to learn. The patient in question during this event I know super well, because he has the pseudobulbar effect where you cry or laugh in inappropriate situations. I worked there when he was diagnosed, and it's kinda a rare disease, so I remember him especially well because he often has episodes in the waiting room while checking in, and I try to make him as comfortable as possible by acting as if nothing is out of the ordinary. I would say he's one of my favorites because he is a very sweet and kind man regardless, and has treated me with nothing but respect. Unfortunately not the case for all of our patients. Because of the pandemic, and given that most of our patients come to appointments with no acute problems, the office is doing pretty much every appointment as telemedicine with a few exceptions here, and they're for things that absolutely can't be treated over the phone. Telemedicine here is just a normal phone call, because the physician isn't very tech-savvy. The majority of our patient population is geriatric, so they really aren't tech-savvy either, so we don't do video chat or anything like that. The office is small, we have 1 physician, 2 nurses, and me front desk, and I work in a separate, but very open room with a big checkout window and a door on the same side that stays open facing the desk that the physician and 1 nurse sit at. We can just talk normally across the room to hear each other. So generally I kinda zone out while the doctor is doing telemedicine appointments, but subconsciously listen for certain key words or phrases that he usually says every single time before he sends the call to me when he's done to schedule the patient's next follow-up appointment. I'm halfway listening, and I know that he's on the phone, and this patient calls in that I mentioned earlier with the pseudobulbar effect. We'll call him Mr. L. And Mr. L says that he was on the phone with the doctor for his telemedicine appointment, but the call dropped. Not a big deal, this happens somewhat often. I said back to him, I think he's on the phone with someone right now, let me check for you, hold on 1 SEC, and put him on hold. I was double-checking that he was on a patient call and not a personal call. The doctor will literally talk on his cell phone to friends about everything in the world, i.e., hunting, fishing, football, you get the picture. He's older and doesn't really text, just talks on the phone a lot. All the time, but he'll only call patients on the desk Cisco phone. So I see that he was talking on the desk phone, obviously talking to a patient I assume. He would never make a personal call on the Cisco desk phones because our company records every phone call. And I picked the phone back up after being put on hold and said, Hey Mr. L, he's on the phone with another patient right now. Just stay by your phone, and I'll get him to call you right back. But when I picked it back up from hold, there wasn't anyone there. So I start saying hello a few times before hanging up because it was just dead silent. The nurse who sits behind the doctor on the other side of the room turns around to face me and says, Wait, who did you just hang up with? And I was like, Mr. L, why? She replied back to me and said, Because that's who he's talking to right now. Keep in mind the doctor is still on the phone as she's telling me this. And she tells me he's been on the phone with Mr. L this entire time. I knew without a doubt from the moment Mr. L called in that the doctor was on a call already, and was on this call the entire time with 0 interruptions. Me and the nurse are just extremely bewildered by this, and by the time the doctor was done with his call and sent it to me to schedule the next appointment, I asked Mr. L if his call dropped at any point in time, or if he called the office in the last few minutes. For our telemedicine appointments, the doctor calls the patient, not the other way around. He told me, well, I dropped my phone on the floor, but I just picked it back up and kept talking. He seemed confused by my question, so I didn't push it any further. Me and the nurse who realized this then checked the call log history, and it confirmed that the doctor's phone had a call with Mr. L for around 13 minutes without interruption, and my phone also had a call during that call from the same number. His first and last name also shows up on caller ID, and it was on both phones. I also confirmed with the doctor that his call with Mr. L was never interrupted, and he confirmed that it wasn't at any point in time. When I told him what happened, he just chuckled and said we were living in the twilight zone and had zero logical explanation for it. I also recognized his voice, and there is zero doubt in my mind that it was indeed Mr. L I spoke to. So, the only reasonable explanation the nurse that witnessed this and I could seem to come up with is that maybe in another dimension, when Mr. L dropped his phone on the floor it did drop the call, and when he called back, I answered in this dimension, but he was disconnected after I put him on hold, since it was radio silence after I picked it back up. Honestly, if you have any reasonable explanations other than it was just someone else calling in, because I know that was impossible, the call history log backed up it was the exact same phone number, and I know it was his voice. Feel free to shoot them below. I'm honestly just mind blown by this, and while I was never disbelieving of alternate dimensions before, I was skeptical because of lack of hardcore proof. But this has definitely convinced me. Story 8. These are stories of other people experiencing weird things that involved me, but weren't caused by me. Hope you enjoy. Number 1. A woman who frequented my dad's workplace convinced him that she knew me and sponsored me in Little League. I never played Little League, but I did volunteer at some games with my after-school club doing arts or snacks. The next time she came around, they chatted and my dad mentioned that I never played sports. She was adamant she sponsored me, and the next time she came in, she showed him a photo of a team flag with my name stitched in. I have a somewhat unique name. Probably less than 10 people have ever had my first name/last name combo. My dad thought she was weird and gave her business to his colleague LOL. Number 2. An old friend I hadn't spoken to since high school texted me out of the blue, saying she had a crazy dream I was in a car accident. I was commuting during rush hour and a truck switched into my lane without looking, pushing me into the median. She texted me as I was sitting in the back of an ambulance getting looked over, and I sent her a selfie with the EMT to freak her out. Smiley face. Number 3. I used to live next door to my cousin when we were in high school. It was a duplex situation with stairs splitting the building into a left and right side, so our front doors faced each other. I would often go over to escape chores at home or to just hang out. I'd text my cousin, come open the door, followed by knocking an obnoxious tune, and he'd come let me in. One night I was up late watching a movie in my living room. I get a knock at the door and open it to see my cousin standing outside looking rather tired and annoyed. He asked me if I was coming over or not, to which I said no. I'm in the middle of a movie. He asked why I had been knocking on his door and texting him then. We checked my phone and my outbox had 6 texts in a row saying, open door. It freaked us out and I texted him while he was next to me. WTF I didn't text that, and do not open the door. In between my 2 texts to him, another open door was sent. He had his messages open, and we saw all 3 messages pop up in real time. This was before I had a smartphone, LG Beacon. I looked it up, so I chalked it up to an actual tech glitch, but my cousin maintains that he heard a melodic knocking on his door at the same time he got the first 6 open door messages. Story 9. So I set off on a trip to Scotland from Leeds, and there is a guy on the side of the road about an hour into my journey with a sign saying that he is heading up north towards Glasgow. I had never seen a hitchhiker before and was curious. He was wearing a suit and had a briefcase with him which, looking back, was probably kind of odd. But hey ho, I'm a confident person, YOLO, so pulled over and told him I was heading up to Scotland if he would like a ride. He seemed perfectly normal, really handsome anyway, and offered to give me some money for the ride, so I didn't particularly think that I was in danger in any way. I asked him a couple of questions, told him I was in the police in kind of a jokey way to see how he would react, but he got in and we set off. He was sitting beside me in the front, and everything seemed perfectly normal for the first hour or so. We spoke about normal things, hobbies, interests, family, but we mostly just stayed quiet. About 2 hours and we stopped for food at a small little village pub. As I get up to get out of the car, he puts his hand on my leg, and at first I'm taken aback because number 1, he had been talking about his wife, and number 2, you can normally tell when a guy is into you from the get-go, but this wasn't like that at all. Yes, we had been driving, but he was really distant and kind of quiet the entire time. I look at him, and he looks at me with those type of sex eyes that drive you really crazy. He puts his hand further up my thigh, and I am so bloody horny by this point that I pull him closer, and so we end up having sex in the car park of the pub. It was really late at this point, like 11 p.m., so there wasn't really anyone around. It was the best sex I've ever had looking back, but this is where it gets really fucking weird. When we'd finished, I ask him if he's ready to get going, and he looks at me, smiles, pulls me in for a kiss that was really passionate, equals on his part anyway, says thank you, gets out of the car and starts to run into the forest which was behind the car park. I get out of the car and shout what the fuck, like what the hell are you doing? He doesn't look back, he just carries on running into the pitch black forest. At this point I'm so weirded out, like what the fuck do you do in that situation? I waited like 10 minutes just in case he came back, but he didn't, and bearing in mind we were like 2 hours from where I picked him up, it was all just really strange. But I carry on driving towards Glasgow. I arrive at my mum's house, go to the boot to get my things, and his briefcase is still there. Looking back, I definitely should have just taken it to the police really, but I didn't think about that. I open it, and there was a packet of Maltesers, some underpants, a t-shirt, and an envelope. The name on the envelope was none other than my fucking name. My name. How? We never knew each other before. I told him my first name, but not my second name, like WTF. He never wrote anything down in the car, and never got out of the car to go to the boot. Then inside the letter there were 5 50-pound notes, and a tiny piece of paper saying, buy something pretty. That's really the end of that. I didn't ever see him again. This was 5 years ago, and I still can't bloody explain it. Someone please help. Story 10. I apologize if this doesn't make sense, but I'm freaked out and have no idea how to explain this. I keep replaying it in my head like a clip with the audio, just slightly out of sync. Every time I think I found the missing frame, the memory slips, and I'm left with that same hollow, floating feeling in my stomach. My coworker doesn't want to talk about it. He says it sounds insane. Maybe it does. But it happened. I was there. We'd gone out to dinner after a long day on site. Nothing fancy, burgers, a shared plate of fries we didn't need, and 2 iced teas because we still had emails to send later. We'd done this route maybe 5 times already that week. Leave the restaurant, straight shot for a couple of miles, then a right turn into the parking area of the hotel. 7 minutes, tops. The road had become part of the routine, the way certain songs attach themselves to a trip and become the soundtrack for that short stretch of your life. I could have drawn it with my eyes closed. The row of auto shops on the left, the cracked billboard with half the vinyl peeling, the little pawn shop with neon guitars in the window, the way the pavement dips slightly before the light that always stays green just long enough. We pulled out at 8:37 p.m., I remember, because I checked the clock and said, we'll be in sweats by 8:45. The air had that after-rain smell, but the asphalt was already dry. Traffic was light. My coworker, Dan, drove with his forearms resting at 10 and 2, easy, a little slouched. He likes to hum under his breath without realizing it, a monotone buzz that usually annoys me in an oddly comforting way. The interior of the rental still smelled like the little tree-shaped air freshener someone had clipped to the vent before we picked it up. We hit our usual landmarks. 2 miles straight, no turns. The road was simple, gentle streetlights, ordinary night. As we approached the hotel, the tall Courtyard by Marriott sign came into view, glowing white, a reassuring lighthouse for road-weary salespeople and consultants. I could see the building, that blocky silhouette set back from the street, with its square of lit windows. The right turn lane starts just a block before the driveway, with a blue P sign that never lines up right because it leans. I remember noticing a couple dragging suitcases across the lot, a woman in a yellow raincoat despite the clear sky now, the way the plastic of her hood shone under the light. We were a block away. I could have counted down 5, 4, 3, and then we weren't. There was no lurch, no bang, no flash of light. No sensation of movement at all, actually, just the sudden awareness that everything was wrong. We were in motion, yes, the road moving under us, but the street itself had changed. The slim median and slow corporate landscaping were gone. Instead, concrete barriers rose up on either side, as if we'd been tucking along a city street, and, in the space between a breath in and a breath out, merged onto a highway. To the right stood a giant green overhead sign with an exit arrow and a number I didn't recognize. The sound changed, too. The white noise of a steady 35 miles per hour shifted into the deeper hum of highway speed, the wind threading itself through some imperfect seal in the door. Wait, I said, the word out of my mouth before I'd even realized I was speaking. Something is wrong here. Dan's hands tightened on the wheel. Yeah, what the hell just happened? His voice cracked, small, like a kid who's just fallen in a strange place. We were about to turn into the parking area. I twisted around, craning my neck to look through the rear window. No hotel. No Marriott sign glowing tall and polite above the hedges. No gas station next door. Just a ribbon of taillights trailing into distance, guardrails, a scatter of big-box stores in the far dark like beetles lit up and pinned to styrofoam. My chest felt hollow, my brain a beat behind. Pull over, I said. Please. Just pull over. He eased us onto the shoulder just before the exit ramp, hazard lights clicking like a mechanical heartbeat. I unlocked my phone. 8:37 p.m., the exact time it had been when we left the restaurant. I blinked, checked the home screen, then the lock screen again. 8:37. The seconds were moving, but the minutes hadn't budged. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. I opened maps. The little blue dot appeared, except not where it should have been. The route to the hotel formed in that cheerful techno-blue that always assumes everything is fine. 19 minutes, it said. Take exit 12. The arrow pointed the opposite direction from where we'd just been. I zoomed out. The restaurant's red pin sat far to the southwest. We weren't on the simple 2-mile road we knew. We were nowhere we had ever driven this entire week. This is impossible, I said. No, like physically impossible. Dan leaned over to look, then pulled back as if the screen would bite him. Are you messing with me? I can't mess with your eyesight. I snapped, louder than I meant to. I took a breath. We were a block from the hotel. We all saw the sign. He didn't answer. His lips pressed into a thin line. His knuckles had gone white, this big man with the kind of shoulders that make chairs look fragile, gripping the wheel like a life ring. A car whooshed past us, rattling the rental. In the rear view, more headlights approached, blurred streaks that felt too bright. The hazard light's rhythm felt suddenly oppressive, on off, on off. I could hear my own breathing, the blood in my ears. I'm going to call the hotel, I said, half to test my voice, half because doing something felt necessary. The desk clerk answered on the second ring, chipper and bored. Hi, this is room 314. I lied, suddenly panicked that if I said the wrong thing, the wrong world would answer. We're close, just checking if the right-hand entrance is open. Yes, she said, with the slow patience of someone who repeats the same information 100 times a week. Turn right at the main sign, and keep to the left lane. The gate is open. Do you need late check-in? No, I said and hung up. I watched my call time, 34 seconds. My phone now read 8:38 p.m. The minute had changed, finally, as if the act of calling had pulled the clock forward by force. We teleported, I said. The word sounded ridiculous, childish, like something from a forum post I would normally send to a friend with a laughing emoji. But there was no other word that fit the facts. We were at the hotel. Then we weren't. Dan nodded once, jerkily. Let's just go back, he said. Let's not talk about it right now. Let's just go back. He merged onto the exit, followed the map's blue line like it could dissolve the wrongness if we obeyed it perfectly. The drive back took 19 minutes and 30 seconds. We didn't speak. The radio stayed off. The car felt too small, like the air had sharpened into needles. When the hotel finally reappeared, I wanted to cry with relief, and then I wanted to be sick. It looked exactly the same, of course it did, but that only made it worse. The sign. The leaning blue P. The woman in the yellow raincoat was gone, but a man in a baseball cap smoked under the portico in the same bored stance I'd seen in a dozen hotels. We pulled in. We parked. We sat for a second in the dim, engine ticking as it cooled. If anyone asks, Dan said, we missed our turn. Yeah, I said. Okay. We didn't miss our turn. That night, I tried to work. I opened my laptop, stared at a spreadsheet, and suddenly couldn't remember what the colors meant. The logic I had applied all week, green means confirmed, yellow means pending, gaped at me like a stranger's handwriting. I closed the file and sat on the bed, listening to the faint ice machine thunking somewhere down the hall. Story 11. Hi guys. I've been reading this sub for the last few months after something weird happened to me, and a friend told me this was the place to share it. I've hesitated because, honestly, even saying it out loud makes me sound a bit unhinged. But the memory won't leave me alone, and it's been sitting in the back of my mind ever since. So here goes. This all happened about 3 months ago, on what I'm fairly certain was a Sunday, or maybe 2 Sundays. I work night shifts in a call center for an airline, so my sense of time can get a bit foggy, but I'm pretty good at keeping track of days. My normal routine is to get home around 8 in the morning, sleep until late afternoon, and then have a few hours with my wife and son before heading back to work. Sundays are special, though. We have this little family ritual. I wake up earlier than usual so the three of us can watch a movie together, taking turns choosing what to watch each week. That Sunday, everything was perfectly normal. I woke up around 2 p.m., bleary-eyed but rested, shuffled to the kitchen, made a coffee, and went outside for my first cigarette of the day. It was overcast but mild, one of those autumn afternoons that feel like they could tip into winter any moment. I remember the faint smell of wet leaves from the garden and the sound of someone mowing a lawn down the street. Nothing out of the ordinary. When I came back inside, my son was already setting up the DVD player. It was his turn to pick the movie, and he'd chosen Avengers: Civil War. He was bouncing with excitement, and my wife teased him about picking a film he'd already seen a dozen times. We settled on the couch, curtains drawn, snacks ready, and spent the next few hours lost in superheroes and explosions. Afterward, my wife made carbonara for dinner, her signature dish. I remember joking that she puts enough Parmesan in it to suffocate a small animal. We laughed, cleaned up, and the rest of the evening rolled out exactly how it always does. Bedtime stories with my son, a quiet cup of tea with my wife, and me heading out the door at 9:30 p.m. Work that night was uneventful. A few frustrated travelers, some scheduling mix-ups, nothing I hadn't handled 100 times before. I even remember checking the time, Monday, 2:13 a.m., and groaning at how long the shift still had to go. By the time I clocked out at 8 a.m., I was tired but content. Monday morning traffic was as miserable as always, and I listened to the radio host complaining about another wet start to the work week. It was definitely Monday. No question about it. I got home, made myself a cup of tea, and crawled into bed. That's when things got strange. I woke up to my wife's voice, light and teasing. "You forgot to set your alarm again," she said. "It's already 3 p.m., and your son's been waiting for you to wake up. He's desperate to watch his movie." I blinked, groggy and confused. "What are you talking about?" I said. "We watched Civil War yesterday. It's Monday. You should be at work, and he should be at after-school club." Her smile faltered. "It's Sunday," she said, like I was the one joking. "I haven't even gone to work yet." I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up, Sunday, October 25th, 3:02 p.m. I can't describe the way my stomach dropped. It wasn't like waking up from a dream. It was like realizing the ground under you wasn't solid. I just sat there for a minute, staring at the date, feeling this creeping cold in my chest. My wife noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked, but when I tried to explain how I'd already lived through this day, how I'd gone to work, sat through a Monday rush hour, and fallen asleep, I could tell she didn't believe a word of it. She gave me this look of patient concern and said, "You must have had one of those vivid dreams. You've been working too hard." Maybe that's what it was, I told myself. But it didn't feel like a dream. My dreams are fragmented, fuzzy around the edges. This had been clear, concrete. The kind of clarity you only get in waking life. Still, I tried to brush it off. I got up, had my cigarette, poured my coffee, and went through my usual routine. Everything was the same, down to the overcast sky. My son was bouncing in the living room again, putting Civil War into the player, just like before. My wife made the same jokes. We even had carbonara again for dinner, because, of course, to them it was the first time. I told myself to take note of every difference, but there weren't many. The smallest things had changed, though. The neighbor's lawnmower didn't start this time. The radio station played a different ad. The Parmesan clumped in the sauce a little more. Tiny inconsistencies that somehow made everything feel worse, like I was inside a slightly altered copy of my own life. That night, when I went to work again, I was on edge. The call queue, the customers, everything was the same as before. Identical. I recognized voices, complaints, even the hold music cutting out in the same exact spots. I knew what every person was going to say before they said it. By the third call, I was finishing people's sentences in my head. That's when the panic really started to settle in. When I got home the next morning, I told my wife about it again, and again she laughed it off. She said I must have dreamed about going to work, and my brain filled in all the details from memory when I woke up. But if that were true, how could I have known all the calls? The exact same phrasing, the same names, the same hold issues? That's not how dreams work. I've only told one other person about it, my best mate, who's into paranormal stuff. He's the one who pointed me here. He thinks I experienced a glitch, like I somehow slipped backward into the same day. I've read up on those stories since, and they all make my skin crawl a little, because so many of them sound like mine. People reliving days, getting lost on familiar roads that suddenly change, seeing things out of sync. I can't explain it logically. I keep running through possibilities in my head. Sleep deprivation? But I wasn't exhausted. Some sort of blackout? No alcohol, no medication. Hallucination? My wife was there the whole time, and she remembers that day, both versions of it, just fine, but to her, only one of them existed. What gets me most is how real it was. Not dreamlike, not foggy. I remember the weight of my work headset, the click of the mouse, the feel of the steering wheel on my drive home. I even remember the specific words the radio host said. Monday morning, rain on the motorway, nothing new there. If that was a dream, then I'm scared of how real dreams can feel, because I'd have sworn under oath that I lived that day twice. And here's the weirdest part. I can still remember both Mondays separately. The one I lived first and the one that replaced it. They're stacked in my mind like two overlapping files, both complete but slightly mismatched. When I think back to late October, it's like there's a missing gap between them, a kind of blurred overlap where the timeline folds in on itself.